Okay, yeah, the broadcast is started, and now we're live. So, hello everyone, and welcome back to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
I'm Mike Mateen.
and we are continuing our 2022 Oscar movie marathon. Now, if you missed our introduction episode, that's okay. It's not that complicated. We're just running down all of the nominated movies, trying to see as many as we can. Tonight, we're going to update with the movies we've seen since our introduction, and then we are going to get into detail about some of the ones that we have now both seen. So, uh, do you want to start us off? Which movies have you watched since we did our introduction episode?
Uh, I believe the only two that I have watched since our introduction were Nightmare Alley
Mm-hmm.
and House of Gucci.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, since our introduction episode, I have watched Don't Look Up and Flee. So, uh, we now have some in common, though, that we didn't before, which includes Don't Look Up
Yep.
and Nightmare Alley are now both in common. So, as we are planning to get into some in depth discussion of some of these movies, we are going to include spoilers, I think. For each movie, maybe we do just like very brief, high level, liked it, yes or no, that's before spoilers, and then we'll get into spoilers. And if you're watching live, you're just going to have to roll with the punches. But if you're watching the VOD later, I will put time codes in the episode notes so you can skip to the movies that you want to hear if you want to avoid the spoilers for the ones that you haven't seen yet.
It's very courteous of you.
Yes. Well, the other thing is too, though, that as we've kind of talked about, I tend to think spoilers aren't as big a deal as people make them out to be, but I want to be courteous about it regardless. So, in any case, if we're just going to proceed down the list, the first movie on the list that we have now both seen, so that we can discuss in detail, is Don't Look Up, the Adam McKay satire produced by Netflix, where a comet getting ready, approaching Earth to hit it and create an extinction level event is treated as a sort of a metaphor for the real world impending climate change. And you had seen it before. I have now watched it, and I messaged you about 40 minutes in to say I'm 40 minutes into this movie and I think I hate it, and my experience with the film did not improve from there. So, before spoilers, I really, really did not like it at all. I don't think I've disliked a big Oscar contender this much since Crash. So, that's subjective. I know a lot of people liked it. I'm not telling anyone they're wrong, only my own opinion, but that's what my opinion is.
Yeah, and I wonder if part of that is just colored by the fact that the movie's 3 months old or whatever at this
Hmm.
point, and you've kind of seen opinions on both sides that have kind of entrenched themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and like whether subconsciously you felt like you needed to go to one or the other. Yeah, go for it. Um, I watched this movie like when it first came out, and
Sorry about that.
I I watched this movie when it first came out,
Mm-hmm.
and I also did I wanted to like it more than I did,
Mm-hmm.
but it also didn't have there wasn't almost like this. I don't even want to call it like a security blanket of like, oh, there's a lot of people that don't like it. So
Mm-hmm.
I fought to like it. Whereas you didn't have that. Like it was very easy for you to just be like, yep, I'm not liking it. I'm gonna just lean into that. Whereas when I wasn't liking it, so if we had been reversed, we may be in the same place. But either way, it's not a. It's. I don't think it's
Yeah.
a great movie.
Right. So what I'll say is that as I sat down to watch it, I believe I gave it a fair shot, because even though I had had some expectation that I wouldn't be a big fan, as I sat down to put it on, what was going through my head was, you know what? Maybe it's fine. Maybe my lowered expectations will help out, and it'll surprise me by being better than I expected. And no, Not for me.
Yeah, no, I 100% believe that. I just once it started going the
Yeah.
other way, it
Hmm.
was easier for you to be like, "Yep, this is
Right.
going the wrong way." Whereas for me, I didn't. There was none of that out there yet, so I was
Hmm.
like, "Well, I like everybody involved. I believe in what they're
Yeah.
trying to
I mean, it's
convey."
a lot of really talented people worked very
Yeah,
hard on this movie. I believe that there is a lot of capable filmmaking skills on display. Uh, the awards it's nominated for, incidentally, Best Picture, Best Score, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Editing, I believe.
yep.
And I'm kind of glad it's not one of the ones for Best Director, but I have to say, the Best Screenplay bugs me because I think that is the primary source of all my problems with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like the scenario laid out in the film is not a particularly good metaphor for what we're actually dealing with climate change and climate change denialism. Um, I don't think it's especially funny topic for satire to begin with, which doesn't mean that it couldn't be done. Like for example, Doctor Strangelove is one of my favorite movies, and that's a satire about nuclear war, and so that's a movie that is making sort of a satire comedy about a very serious real world issue with it, where it's a lot of black comedy, and I love that one. So why did I hate this one? Well, it's hard to put a finger on it exactly, but I think what it maybe kind of comes down to is it feels like it's angry at the wrong people. It feels like it's just swinging all of these punches wildly. Who is this movie mad at, and what is it trying to say to them? Because it feels like the message is, gosh, I guess we're all too stupid, so we're all just going to die. Isn't that funny? It almost takes itself too seriously for the parts that are silly to land, because it doesn't feel like it's all taking place in one world.
I agree. And that sums up you've obviously seen it more recently than I have,
Yeah.
so you will remember a lot more of the specifics, but just like general feelings I had from it as I reflect on it is that it it really felt like almost like a series of, I mean, for lack of a better comparison, like Saturday Night Live, you know,
Mm-hmm.
sketches. Like it the joke could have been condensed down to that.
Yeah.
And where Doctor Strangelove succeeds is that the rest of the movie is so interesting, and the build and like how it makes itself a 2 hour event. Whereas this just feels like a bunch of, and I think that's kind of what you're reacting to also, is that it's like, well, in one scene this thing is happening and you're mad about this and it's making fun of this,
Mm-hmm.
but then the next scene is a little bit different. And I was so exhausted watching this movie. I think I text, you messaged you back that maybe 40 minutes, an hour into the movie, I thought it was nearing its conclusion because
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of done with it. And it just felt like I'd watched enough.
Yeah.
And then I looked and it was like, wow, I've got like an hour and a half left.
Yeah, this is
And
a 2 hour and 25 minute movie, which is feels very long to me.
yes, and that back hour and a half is just like it's so scattered, and so
Yeah.
it's just, I was like, wait, what? Why is this continuing to go? And then what, these new characters show up and like those kids or whatever, and it's
Yeah.
like, what? I don't get what their deal is here.
Right. Yeah.
And
It's
now it's just extreme. It's just like, let's just cut back and forth between people chanting
mm-hmm.
and I get what they're saying with that, but it's like, okay, I got it. I don't know. It left me feeling very
Yeah.
discombobulated, and like it was, to the same point as yours, like it was multiple different messages just kind of like lumped together. But movies can do that with lots of different scenarios and weave them
Mm-hmm.
together very well. This one did not, right? Like,
Yeah. So let's go ahead and just sort of, lift the where this is the spoiler line. So we'll talk spoilers from here on. about it, but like, not that I'm jumping into any one particular one, but like, one of the moments for me that was really kind of highlighted what I was saying before about it not really feeling like it takes place in the real, or not even just the real world, but like it's not even its own consistent version of the world. Because a lot of the stuff with Jennifer Lawrence and Leonardo DiCaprio and their whole effort feels most of it very grounded, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of the stuff with them is just really not even played for laughs at all. Or at least I don't think that am I supposed to be laughing at Leonardo DiCaprio having a panic attack in the bathroom? I mean, am I supposed to think that's funny and laugh at it? Because I didn't. But then you have stuff like, as the rockets for the initial nuclear deflection mission are already in the air, they turn around because the billionaire had a better idea in the middle of the mission, and the rockets turn around? What? What? I did not, like, that does not feel like something that could happen in the real world, and it completely shatters any sort of sense of, like, is this, well, I don't believe that. And it breaks any semblance of tracking a parallel to our world. And not only the fact that, I mean, just the fact of it is, by definition, the nature of the threat in this movie is something that we all see it coming, but when it happens, it happens. It's definitive, and it's final, and it's immediate. Right? That's not what climate change is.
Right.
And so, like, I feel like, and I may be wrong here, but I feel like what happened is that Adam McKay heard crowds chanting lock her up, and kind of maybe he got high one day and he was thinking, what if they were saying don't look up, don't look up? Oh, because it's like a comet is up there and they're saying don't look at the comet. And then I feel like that's the inspiration for this movie. I may be mistaken, but that's what it feels like. And it doesn't strike me like, so it's not an especially insightful satire because it doesn't present any options. It doesn't motivate any action. The end with all of our sympathetic characters is them basically deciding to turn off all the media and reconnect with each other as they are doomed. Is that what Adam McKay is trying to say? Is that we should just give up and be with our loved ones because it's too late to do anything? Like, that's the note we're left on with our sympathetic characters in this movie. Is them deciding to ignore it.
Yeah.
And so I think I probably, prior to the last presidential administration, I would have found Meryl Streep and Jonah Hill more unbelievable. But that said, I felt a lot of the stuff with them seemed like they were very carefully aiming for the very narrow path where it's just similar enough to the real world that we kind of recognize it, but without it being similar enough that it actually says anything about any real person.
And then yet other characters are so on the nose with their resemblance, even though their actions aren't necessarily tied. Like, was it Charlize Theron's the news person, right? Or is that Cate Blanchett?
Kate Blanchett.
Cate Blanchett, yeah. Sorry. And I mean, she's so like, it's so clear that that's Megyn Kelly. Like, you can't even get away from it. And now she doesn't do things that Megyn Kelly did in the movie, but it's like, it's weird because they put her like right on. And then the billionaire is Elon Musk, like, clear.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
with maybe a little Steve Jobs in there, right?
a little, yeah, yeah. They put this sort of like the, you know, sort of aura of Steve Jobs, but it's really,
Yeah,
the
for
joke
yeah, no.
is that it's Elon Musk and it's making
Mhm.
fun of the submarines that were going to save the kids
I
that failed, and like,
I
yeah, these
yeah.
these colossal ideas that
I
fail.
I
But
will
then
say there is one line in this movie that elicited an out loud chuckle from me. And that was the bit where, so he had previously humiliated Leonardo DiCaprio by telling him that the algorithm knows that how he's going to die, and specifically it knows that he's going to die alone. And it again is another scene that I'm watching that and is like, am I supposed to be laughing at this? What am I supposed? What is the intended reaction from me that this scene is supposed to elicit? But in any case, later the president, played by Meryl Streep, says, "Oh, I'm curious. I want to know how what does it say about me?" And it says, "You're going to be eaten by a brontorok. We don't really know what that means." And I was just like, "What?" I mean, but it's another illustration of something that does not map to the real world at all. Especially, like, the payoff is not bad, but the thing is, honestly, if the rest of the movie was more like that, like if the whole thing was bigger in that way, I think I would have liked the movie a lot more. But by having some of that stuff and then the rest of it so grounded as to the point that it's not even funny at all, I it it doesn't manage to land anything for me. I just was very unhappy watching it. I think so. You know, I am not someone who makes a habit of leaving movies unfinished. If I start a movie, I'm almost without exception going to finish it, and usually I would only stop it if I'm interrupted by something. But if I was watching this movie under any other circumstance, I would not have finished it. You know, if I had just put it on 3 months ago, I don't think I would have watched the whole thing.
I mean, that's kind of how I felt like trudging through the last hour and a half.
Yeah.
I
Well, so perhaps then we can wrap our conversation on it by saying neither of us really liked it. That does not mean that anyone who did like it is a bad person or anything. That's certainly not the judgment, but just subjectively, comedy is hard, and this one feels like I saw someone trying to defend it by saying, you know, well, sure, it's not subtle, but you know, I kind of like that it wasn't subtle, and I'm like, lack of subtlety is not the problem.
yeah.
I like taking big swings, but this one feels like it takes a swing at the catcher's head instead of the ball, and then says, "Ha ha! Isn't that funny?" And it's like, no, it's kind of really not. Anyway, so I got the point got away from me, which is to say, if someone likes this movie, I don't want to tell you you're wrong, but I also am not going to say that I liked it when I didn't. So,
No, and the person that's closest to me that liked the movie a lot, like their whole thing was, well, I mean, it was just great to see someone just show how ridiculous Trump supporters are and people who deny climate change. And I was like, well, I mean, those are two different things, and
yeah.
it didn't really do either well. But I mean, I guess like if
Well,
you just want to
yeah.
see a movie that supports what you like and that makes you like it, I
Well,
guess.
right, but it's the sort of message that feels like the people who are receptive to that message know it already.
Right.
And the people who aren't receptive, it's either going to go over their heads or they're just going to reject it anyway. So what's the point you're making?
I agree.
And then to layer on top of that it's not even just that, because it's also implying that the problem is all of us because we're too interested in celebrity gossip and Twitter, and that's why the comment's going to hit us. And it's like, I don't think that's the problem really. Anyway, yeah, I didn't like it. So let's talk about something else. Let's move on.
Not my pick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure not. Okay, so the next movie on the list, just going down the list that we've both seen, is Dune, which I was not super enthusiastic about, but feels like a breath of fresh air. Moving on to it as a movie that I think is at least well made and interesting to
Yeah,
talk
and
about.
honestly, like we touched on a lot of, what I felt about this movie
Mm-hmm.
in the last one, just even in our summation of it. It's fine. It's
Mm-hmm.
I it has a lot of cool special effects. It feels like watching a video game though. Like it feels like the whole thing is just a bunch of CGI.
Yeah.
It's I was told it would be the most accessible Dune, and yes, it is less confusing to me, who is not aware of the source material, even though I've seen the other movies,
Mm-hmm.
and those still confuse me even after I've seen them. Like I get it a little bit more,
Yeah.
but it still feels confusing, and I don't
Well,
know
yeah.
why.
I mean, so I think I can get at that because essentially I'm a pretty big fan of the book. I've read the book probably 3 times. I've certainly seen, the other, the David Lynch movie version. I've seen, the sci-fi TV adaptations of it, and uh, so I'm kind of coming at it from the opposite perspective there, without necessarily saying that like I'm a big fan who was dying to see another movie version of it, because I wasn't especially. I mean, interested, sure, and that's why I went to see it. But I'm also tends to be not very purist when it comes to movie adaptations of books. Movies are not the same medium as books, and I think it's a mistake to try to be too slavish in adapting them. Um, but the reason that Dune has long kind of been considered so difficult to make into a movie is like I've not done an actual page count or anything like this, but I would wager that something like 60% of the word count is internal monologue of people thinking about what's going on and how it fits into their worldview and the things they know already and the history of places and what's going on outside the action of the moment. There's a lot of that. And so when you have a movie that basically just takes the actual external plot, like if you're following the characters around them in the camera and you can't see into their head, but you're just watching the things that they do, this movie captures that pretty well. And for the most part, it even does a relatively good job of giving you enough context to at least understand what you're looking at.
Yeah,
But what you're missing, almost without exception, is the emotional context. Like some of it you get early on with So I guess we're probably into spoiler territory now, but some of you get early on with Paul, his feelings of uncertainty going to this new place, the possibility, he's feeling some anxiety about what's going on with his dad, and some of that, some of that comes through, but at the same time, it's just still feels a little bit like, instead of just having this long explanation of how a character's feeling and how it motivates their actions and how the things that have happened to them in the past led them to be at that point, it says they did the thing. And then they showed it in an interesting way, but it felt a little hollow to me by comparison. And then in that context, I kind of kept waiting for the movie to surprise me in some way, but it just really didn't, because it just kind of, every scene was just the next thing that happens, only without the context. I mean, I did like the visuals. I did like things about it. I think it's generally well made, um, but it's a little bit like the Disney live action remakes. Not in the sense that I wished I was watching some other version, as much as it just felt a little bit like I didn't need for this to exist, and it hasn't really personally persuaded me that it was worth all the fuss. The movie, that is,
right.
because The book is fine. The book is great. It's a classic, and nothing changes that. And this is like, okay, well, but more people probably read the book, and a lot of people, really were blown away by it. And I suspect it tends to be the people, and no judgment here, but the tends to be the people who um, are better able. They get the most out of just being able to soak in the gorgeous visuals and all, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's not a judgment. That is a completely valid way to consume movies, is to just sort of let the imagery wash over you. And I think the movie does that fairly well. Um, but I was just watching it kind of just workmanlike go through the action of the plot without really any of the emotional history or weight or context.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because I'm left sitting here, even though it was, like I said, less confusing than I remember being the other ones being. I still leave with the same general impression that there's this world where they're mining spices; those are important, and there's these worms that can attack you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's so much more to the story, and but that's still like, if I had to just sum up what I remember about Dune, that remains what I remember about Dune.
Yeah. I'm kind of smiling just because that summary kind of highlights another thought that I had about it, which is that while it makes perfect sense that this story is long enough that trying to do it all in one movie is going to necessarily mean you have to leave out a lot of plot, and they didn't want to do that, so they're going to split it into two movies. But I don't want to say uniquely, but particularly, this story really suffers from being split up in that particular point of the story, which is the halfway point of the story, but it kind of really leaves out the whole point of Paul being kind of this lab grown chosen one, and what that means for the people of this planet and the fate of the galaxy writ large, because he starts having these prophetic visions about not merely leading the people here to some kind of victory, but it spanning into and like a centuries spanning galaxy wide war directly resulting from his actions, and yet he doesn't know what to do about it. And all that stuff's in the second half. To the extent that it's in the movie at all, like in the first book, because I think that's a little bit of a failing of the first book too, is that the Dune books in general are trying to highlight the problems with chosen one type of like archetypes, and what that does to people, and the stories they believe and tell about themselves. But and the first book is a little, it's a little bit like we sometimes talk about Fight Club, where the first half establishes the glamour of a certain worldview, and then the second half, where it's supposed to deconstruct that, isn't as effective, and so you end up with a lot of people who really only remember the first part. And the first Dune book kind of does that a little bit. Like, he is having all of these prophetic visions of how bad this is all going to ultimately go, but the first book still nonetheless focuses a lot of on how cool it is that he's doing the cool stuff right now, and less about how bad it's going to be later. But yeah, and then all of that stuff is like really hardly in this movie at all, because they split the story in half. So I feel like, I mean, it sounds like this one did well enough that they're going to make part two, but boy, I don't know how they start part two. That's going to be rough, because in the books, it's this natural follow on from everything that has just happened, and there's an urgency to it. But when there's been a year or more in between, I can't help but feel like that's going to be harder to portray. But yeah, so to be sure, though, I think the movie does a lot of things really well. It just ultimately leaves me, like, entertained but not inspired. It's fine.
I honestly, I felt the same way. So even though we came at it from two
Yeah.
completely different perspectives, we left with the same feeling. It was, like I said, it was fine.
Yeah.
I'm not unhappy with watching it, but it didn't resonate with me as like,
Hmm.
oh my god, I've got to pick that book up. Like this is a classic. It was just like, all right,
Yeah. All right. So, ready to move on. The next movie that we've both discussed would be Nightmare Alley,
yeah.
or both
So
seen.
why don't we do the actual like tick the boxes and say what it's nominated
Oh,
for and all
good
that stuff.
idea. Yeah. Do you want to take that?
I don't know if I have the spreadsheet up. Oh,
Well, yeah. So
go for it.
it's
You just
certainly
go for it.
for
Yeah.
Best Picture. Um, I'm just scrolling down the list because I don't have it like set up exactly this way. But Best Picture, and then I think it's a lot of the like production
It
design,
was. Yeah.
cinematography, costume design, uh, and I think that's it. So Nightmare Alley, yeah, it was four. So picture, cinematography, production design, costume design.
Yep. And it's appropriately nominated in all of those categories.
Yeah, I think those are the parts that it's best,
Yeah.
at, and so I had seen it already and briefly kind of went into my impressions, but you've more recently watched it. What did you think?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I I don't know. I know it's nominated for Best Picture. I'm just going to go ahead and say right now, it's probably not going to be my pick.
Hmm.
Um, it's good, it's entertaining, and but it is the craftsmanship behind it is what makes it really really interesting.
Hmm.
Like the cinematography, the production design, the costume design, all the things that it's nominated for, and it's a good enough story to service all of that,
Hmm.
and it you know ultimately, I think what you said, it has a very, easy to digest ending, I think was how you put it,
Well,
which is true. Yeah,
it's certainly in comparison to The Power of the Dog for sure.
right.
So like, well, and I don't think I said that on the podcast. That this was once again an offline conversation where the question was like, which of those two would be the better one to watch before bed? And I was thinking, I feel like Nightmare Alley is the sort of movie that you can watch, and then when you finished, it's done with you. Whereas Power of the Dog, you'll will try to linger with you for a while, and yeah.
Got it.
But so
And that
that
makes
was the context there.
that context definitely helps because it is actually a pretty powerful ending,
Hmm.
but it's not so like mind blowing that you leave changed, right? It just what the ending does, before we get truly into the spoiler, is that, I
Hmm.
mean, obviously we talked earlier in the last one about the premise of the movie being that, it's the guy joins the carnival and then sort of finds his way using the tools and techniques there to kind of make his riches on his own, and then he has a downfall at the end.
Hmm.
But what it really hammers home is what the exploitation of these carnivals really did to people, that
Hmm.
it wasn't necessarily just the exploitation of the paying public that were coming in, but there was a deep exploitation of the people that were the performers.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what that just nails in at the end.
Yeah.
And
Well,
which again, to your point, like when you leave that, it's like, well, I'm not going to be a carny, so it's like
hmm,
it doesn't have any kind of greater repercussions on me other
well,
than
right, because it's
there
not
are people
even,
who will exploit you.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not even really trying to say anything about real world carnivals so much as it's using that for set dressing to tell a noir story, right?
Right.
It's not really trying to make a broader point. It's just really almost like the location and the flavor, right?
Right. And so the whole point is that there are levels of exploitation in this world that people will do, and which one are you most comfortable with,
Hmm.
right? Like, are you comfortable with what Bradley Cooper is doing because he's kind of harmless and making money
Well,
and
I
he's
mean,
not hurting what? Yeah, and then but then he ends up
hmm,
not being harmless,
yeah,
right?
hmm,
And then what his comeuppance is that he ends up in the worst
Well,
position.
I think, well, that certainly, I think, starts getting into spoiler territory,
Yes,
even if
yes.
you don't
Oh,
give the
sorry.
detail.
Sorry.
But that's okay. So I'm just making it clear for anyone watching that we are definitely in that territory now. But yeah, I think that while I like the movie, I think that there was the criticisms of it that I've heard. Um, I think are fair, and those are to say that it is very slow burn to the point of maybe even being a little boring in times. I feel like I don't know that I was ever quite bored, but I could certainly say that I think you could probably cut half an hour out of this movie, not even without taking any like plot points out, but just trimming the edges of scenes and stuff like that. And, maybe to some extent it's like that because it wants to just bask in all of these amazing locations that they've created and all of that sort of thing, and the visuals to just soak it all in. But it does make for a not fast paced movie. Um,
No, and I'll just add real quick. It also may be to let the viewer kind of marinate in the choices that people are making, because
mhm,
they make these choices that are just sort of naturally like, this is what needs to happen for me to move on in my life.
mhm,
They make them like these deliberate things that people are choosing to do,
mhm.
right? And so I think that's part of it too, is that it really wants you to kind of like soak that in,
Yeah,
right? And I was fortunate to benefit from the fact that you told me it was a slow burn,
yeah,
so that I was willing to just say, okay, well, this is what I'm in for. Let me just
mhm.
kind of
You can
watch it
calibrate your
and see.
expectations.
Yeah, my expectations were
Mhm.
leveled correctly, so
Yeah,
I was able to sort of take to again do that, which is why I say that. It's like that's kind of how I felt. Is like, okay, like it's really establishing like his relationship with these people and what he's going to do with that, and how why he's choosing to kind of exploit the gang. I'll keep saying exploit because I think that is the theme of the movie.
oh yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, he's
Lots
going to
of
exploit
exploitation going on.
the knowledge he got from them, and he's going to use that
Yeah.
to then exploit other people to get money. And like but he's choosing, even though it feels very natural, and
Mhm.
like, well, of course that's what he would do, but that's how the movie is kind of constructed, right?
Yeah. One of the other criticisms that I heard of it that I think is it's not even really like it's not a fair criticism of the film itself necessarily, um, because it's more central to the expectations that this person had. But this person was sure that any minute something supernatural was going to happen. And, spoilers, it just doesn't. That's not what this movie is. It's a noir story, it's not a ghost story. And, or a something else story, right? It's noir thriller, not supernatural horror at all. But certainly, if you had the impression that that's what it was, perhaps because that is often the kind of movies that Guillermo del Toro makes, um, I could imagine being frustrated with this movie if you kind of just were constantly waiting for that to happen and then it just never did. But again, that and the fact that it's a slow burn just makes me think again of the person who only watches 10 minutes of movies knowing nothing about it, which I don't mean to harp on. People are allowed to consume media however they want, but it's just another illustration of how being able to set your expectations, to know kind of what you're getting into can often result in enjoying a movie that you might not have otherwise. Um,
Yeah, and I can see that. I mean, I mean, I had to watch it on my own because I couldn't convince my wife to watch it with me, because when you watch the trailer, there's a lot of ominousness to
mm-hmm.
it. It's shot in a very dark way.
Yeah.
It's called Nightmare Alley. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
going to be nightmares. Things
Yeah.
that will give you nightmares are going to show up, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you can see why you could go in with that
Oh yeah, yeah.
expectation.
No,
Yeah.
I totally can. That's kind of why I brought it up as a not entirely irrelevant thing about it. Is just I think it is I mean, it is literally a remake of a classic noir film. And so I think that people aren't as used to that sort of model of storytelling anymore. And that's, part of like the slow burn is part of that too. And what I will say that we haven't quite said so far is that I feel like by the time you get to the end and things actually kind of start falling apart, like, yeah, like the pacing picks up, things they click along pretty well, and it's pretty satisfying by the time you get to that point. It just takes its time getting there, and there's a lot of moving pieces where, like, by the end you kind of see why all of those things had to be there, but a lot of them don't necessarily sell themselves on why they need to be there at the time.
Correct. And I think I even said to you when I was commenting on the ending offline again
Mm.
that the in order to really get the payoff, like you have to have been paying attention because it was subtle. And I've thought more about that. It's not actually subtle. Like it's a pretty clear
Yeah.
point in the movie how you go from how he's exploiting people and turning them into what he calls the geek, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
it's not like it's that part subtle, but how it fits in and the way it enters the story, like it doesn't feel like it's important. It just feels like, oh, this is just like a thing he does.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like this is going to be the end game hammer that drops on our protagonistic
Mm.
guy, you know.
I was a little bit surprised when you did that, only in the specific context of our longtime friendship, where typically, much more often than not, you are the person who guesses movie endings ahead of time and not me. But like this is perhaps an example where I felt like as soon as I heard the description of, such a specific description of the process by which he goes, a geek is, brought into that whole thing, I was like, I bet this is how the movie ends. And so, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
and
no, credit to you.
I'm not trying to like
No,
crow about that necessarily as much as
good.
see, the thing is, in this context, it's kind of because I like the ending. And so it was less about me guessing what they were going to do so much as, oh, wouldn't it be cool if that's the ending? Because they have done something that would set up a satisfying ending if they return to it like this. And so I just predicted that that would be one way they could do it, and sure enough, that is what they did. But
Yes, I mean yeah, very good. Much credit to you because it is the, but it's part of the way the movie's set up is like it's sort of in there, like
hmm
it's just sort of like a thing that's happening that I was like, okay, like wow, that guy's a real dick, like
hmm
that's how he creates these things. Like, well, I guess it's just showing us how shitty of a person he is, and it didn't even click with me until like later it started to like come true, like when they started referencing the fact that he doesn't say that he chooses not to drink or he doesn't want to drink right now, but that he never drinks. Like, and it's
yeah,
like that's the
red
trigger where
flag.
they understand, yeah, that he knows what will happen, and that's why he says he never drinks, right?
hmm Yeah,
And
it's
then when he
like
starts to drink, you're like, okay. And again, I still didn't get it yet. I was like, well, this is where things go wrong for him. Like, I
hmm
at least got that part right. Like, okay, like he's not going to just manage
yeah.
this through.
Well,
Like,
yeah. So I think what is true is like if you've seen a lot of film noir movies, this movie is not subverting the tropes; it is wallowing in them, but to good effect. I don't mean that as a criticism. It's more just kind of like those are some good tropes. I think it's a common misconception from a lot of people that something being a trope automatically means it's bad. That's not what a trope means. It's just kind of like, what? You made your house out of bricks? How cliche. It's like, no, it's just bricks. Bricks are, you know, good
good for
building
making
material.
houses. Yeah.
Yeah. So that when you say something has tropes, that's what you're talking about is story building bricks, and it's just common make but it uses a lot of the ones that are classically used in a lot of noir stories, and it uses them in a straightforward way, but in a what I thought was very satisfying. You've got the femme fatale in the form of Kate Blanchett's character, and you've got the nice girl who gets done wrong by the flawed hero who's running from a dark past, and who is undone by his own flaws. I mean, all of this is classic Noir stuff, and I mean, I love that, and so I was kind of really relishing that.
Yeah, in
Even
a way that like when he wasn't rich and famous and having, Kate Blanchett like fawn over him and all that, like he was able to manage his flaws.
mhm,
It was like his success led him to ignore the
greed and
tools he
ambition.
had, right, his all of his life he had built these tools to work on his flaws, escape his past, but he thought that success was going to be the ultimate escape from his past, but it was
Mm-hmm.
ultimately his undoing.
Yeah.
You know,
And
it's
so
very satisfying
yeah,
in a dark way.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so like even though it takes a long time to get there, by the time they have, the plan has started to go wrong, right? Because essentially, they end up with this whole big plan. They're going to defraud this really rich guy who, even upon the first meeting, Bradley Cooper should have left that meeting and said, "No, no, 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 not this guy, not this guy. No, 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 this guy will kill us." But
His
he's
ego. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. But Richard Jenkins was great in that role. By the way, I mean I like him always, but yeah, he was great in a role that was a little different than we sometimes see him, because he does sort of warm and reassuring so well that having him just be this cold, severe guy with this core of like desperate neediness inside, that's a scary dude. That character.
Oh, which, by the way, also that's another part of this movie that could lead into your like expectation of the supernatural
Oh
is that
yeah,
there's this whole delineation between we don't do
spook show, right?
spook shows,
Like, so
right?
if you haven't seen it and you're listening to the spoilers anyway, just to be clear, he learns the secrets of mentalism, which are basically a lot of tricks that people can use to appear that they're reading your mind, but what they're really doing is using common guesses and half answers that are designed to sort of trick you into revealing the full answer without it seeming like that's what has happened, and instead seeming like they read your mind.
Right.
Um,
And a communication tool book where somebody could know more than you do
mhm.
and communicate to you with code
Yes.
words,
Right.
right? To,
Yeah.
to kind of
So
fulfill
all of the
out.
secrets
Yeah.
of how those sorts of acts are done, and in
Right.
particular, the guy who developed all of these tricks and then teaches Bradley Cooper's character warns him that one of the ways that these tools can be used is to try to convince people that you're receiving messages from ghosts, and saying, "Do not do that. It only goes to bad places." But as you were saying, the point being that is absolutely what he starts doing. He starts telling people he is in touch with ghosts and he's a medium, and that he's using these tricks to give that
Financially.
impression.
Yeah.
Right. But certainly the idea that he's saying that he's hearing from ghosts could raise the expectation that there are going to be actual ghosts to show up at some point.
Right. You could assume that, oh, that's what's going to go wrong is he's going to actually tap into the
Right.
supernatural.
Yeah.
Right.
Stir of
But
Echoes
that's,
style or something.
yeah, but that's not obviously not what
Yeah.
happens. So,
Stir of Echoes is a great movie, though. I like that one.
yes.
Anyway, but yeah, so I think that it does a lot of interesting things really well. I think that it maybe could be improved by trimming it a little bit, tightening it up just a little bit. Um, Especially in kind of that, like once he is settled into the carnival up until they're actually setting up to defraud Richard Jenkins, that whole section could be shorter, I think. Um, but ultimately, though, I think it lands the plane and it's beautiful the whole ride long.
Yes. So,
So I'm
so
interested, though. I want to go back to something you said earlier at the beginning of the conversation about Nightmare Alley, is that you don't think it's going to be your ultimate pick. But of the three Best Picture nominees that you've seen so far, there is Don't Look Up and Dune and this. So Is it
It's
just
the
that
best
you
one of
are?
the three I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say is so your assumption that it's not going to be your final pick is just based on expectation that some of the others you're going to like more.
Yes, I think there are some things on here who are done by people that I think do a great job. I
Hmm.
think there are some that you've seen that I think you speak more highly of,
Hmm.
and I take your word on these things. I I feel like I'm going to find a movie that resonates better with me.
Yeah.
But that's not to say this is a bad movie.
Hmm.
I really did enjoy it. I thought it was worth my time to watch it.
Yep. So yeah, just and like the other two that I've seen, Coda and The Power of the Dog, I think are I would probably vote for both of those over the other three that we just talked about. With Coda getting the edge, Power of the Dog is really powerful, but it's also kind of not for everybody, and it's a harder watch. We talk about whether movies are approachable or not, and that one is not very. But Coda is a much more traditional film in a lot of ways. Just in terms of family drama stuff that I like, but it done really well. But so in any case, let's move on to best animated feature. So in this category, I have now seen Flea, which I'll just speak to briefly. We talked about the idea that, like, wait, best animated feature, best foreign language feature, and best animated or best documentary feature? And the answer is because it is the story of a refugee from Afghanistan who, because of some of the things that he tells in his story, feels that he needs to protect his identity. And so, kind of the conceit is that he is animated so as to not show his real face, and so on. Now, obviously, I think it's not like the rest of it is live action and it's just him that's animated. It's animated, and they use that to retell, like, as he's telling his story, documentary style. They're often showing the scenes, right, in animation. And so that's what Flea is. It's very good. I liked it a lot. People should check it out. I watched it on Prime Video, but it's available to rent in a lot of streaming locations. People should check it out. I think it's really good.
Yeah, I
It made me
definitely
cry at
intend
one
to.
point.
Yeah, no, I intend to because I like some of the other movies on this, but obviously with it being in three categories and then your endorsement, I feel like I need to
Hmm.
see it in comparison. So
Yeah, I recommend people watch it. It does tackle some heavy stuff. It is not for kids. I mean, like it has some heavy content in it, not like in a graphic sense, but in a content, you know, world issues sense.
got it.
Human trafficking and war and that sort of thing. Anyway, so but now let's talk about the best animated feature. There's three of them that we have both seen now. Do you want to just keep going down the list and start with Encanto? I feel like I
Yep.
have probably more to say about Encanto than I do about Luca or Araya and the Last Dragon.
Yeah. So
Let's just do Encanto, and then and perhaps we'll call it for tonight. I think that's
sounds good.
a good chunk of
Okay.
movies. So so Encanto, I think we kind of covered it at a high level briefly before. So I don't think so. We both kind of, you said you liked it. I said I liked it, but maybe have some nitpicks about the ending. I'm just basically saying I don't think we have a lot to say before we want to just dive into the plot and start talking spoilers. So,
Yeah.
spoiler warning for Encanto, and then that'll be the last movie we're talking about in this episode for tonight. Um, so for Encanto, I liked so much of it, quite a bit. I came away from it feeling it very similar in my head to Moana, but by comparison, like what I think back about Moana is that I love everything up until when she meets Maui, and then the stuff that's the climax with her towards the end, I think all of that stuff is incredible and moving and everything. And it's not that I don't like The Rock as Maui. It's not that I don't think those sequences are good. It's that it just feels like it loses its way a little bit in that section. Like the story really loses a lot of its propulsion at that point. Because all of a sudden, instead of this driving quest, it's dragging along this recalcitrant demigod, and that feels different. But by comparison, I think Encanto feels like it's a very similar tone through a lot of it for me. But at the same time, I think it's more even throughout. Like it doesn't have that long section that feels very different to me.
Right.
But what I was getting at when I talked about the ending is primarily just that what is revealed over the course of the movie, of course, is that Abuela has been kind of terrorizing her family for 50 years, to describe it in a very uncharitable way, of course, by forbidding displays of any negative emotion. You have to put all of your needs to the side to help according to my definition of what needs to be done. And, do what I say, even if I don't say it. You better think before you do anything whether I would approve or not. And usually I won't. And that sort of control over the family did a lot of damage. And I think that we can certainly say that it's understandable that she's coming from a place of trauma herself, and we can absolutely be sympathetic of that. But I just felt like the movie kind of let her off the hook really easy at the end. Like all she had to do was say like, "Oh, it's all my fault. I'm so sorry." And then immediately it's like, "Oh, it's okay. It's fine. We'll get through." And I'm like, "Well, wait just a minute. You only just got her to the threshold of maybe starting to consider that she has done something wrong, and then it's just completely good now." I wish we could have seen a little bit more of the work needed for her to change her behavior, as opposed to just having to take the movie's word for it and shorthanding to the happy ending.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It what the movie does well though is that
Yeah.
you get very swept up in it, and if you don't take that step back to like think critically like you did, it just you can easily be carried into the ending without that.
Yeah, well, so I
Not to
think,
say it's right, but
yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, and again, I want to make it clear too that I'm not saying this ruins the movie. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I loved it. I wish that part had been done a little bit differently, but it's a minor complaint overall. It's just one that lingers in the mind for me, is all. But what I can absolutely accept is that the movie is intending us to say, this will be okay. Take our word for it. We're not going to show you every step. Just trust us and let's move on. And it's like, okay. And I think a lot of people are willing to just let it sweep them along that way. And that's fine. That's not bad. I guess part of it was just for me that I think that there's a little bit of a sense that when someone is very controlling in the way that she was seen to be over the course of the movie, like flipping on the martyr switch, which is, oh, it's all my fault, but I can't really elucidate what it is that I did wrong, but I'm going to cry now so that everybody can reassure me that it's actually okay and I can go back to doing what I've been doing. And that behavior kind of, it comes too readily to mind for me to entirely trust her breakdown.
I get that. Yeah. And so like I said, I think the same, I still feel the same in the counter to that is that it's not that isn't in a flaw of the end of the movie. It's that's not the primary point of the end of the movie.
I would
And
even,
so
yeah, I would even hesitate to call it a flaw so much as the movie was kind of wanting to just go ahead and hurry past the
Right.
work that would be needed because it's time for the happy ending. And that's
Right.
okay. I just would have liked it to show a little bit more of the process. It's again, like, I don't want to, uh, even calling it a flaw feels almost harsher than I mean it.
Right. Yeah, well, that's then that yeah, that's unfair of me to call it a flaw.
Well,
Then
hey, we're this. It's all about communication, right? That's the whole point.
so that sticking point in the movie
Yeah.
is it you can see though why like why it's not important to them in the story they're telling
Right.
because the story they're telling is ultimately about her and her feeling for so long that she wasn't given this gift and
Mm-hmm.
and what they've done is they've taken just a normal
Her
scenario
Mirabelle
of
as opposed to Whale, you mean?
Mirabelle.
Yeah.
Right, Mirabelle. Yeah. So they're talking about Mirabelle, and what they're doing is they're over indexing on like what normal people feel, in that oh you're supposed to have this passion or this
Mm-hmm.
gift or this feeling or whatever, and because theirs are so like clear what they
Mm-hmm.
can do,
Yeah.
and that's where it's like where Bruno's is he has one that people don't necessarily like, and
Yeah.
so he gets ostracized,
Right.
and Mirabelle doesn't look like she has any, and the end
So
of the
she gets
movie
ignored.
is
Yeah.
right. She gets ignored. And so the end of the movie is, oh, wait, maybe Bruno's gift we should have paid more attention to. And oh, Mirabelle actually has this gift that was just like a little bit of a longer, slow burn to understand like
Mm-hmm.
what her like
Yeah. No, and so I love
value
all of
was.
that
Right.
stuff. Yeah. And so, I wish I didn't have just that one little splinter. It's a little bit like when it's just like when everything else is so good, you tend to almost fixate more on the little thing that bothers you a little bit. But I want to be clear that I really loved everything else about this movie. I love Mirabelle. I really I liked the exploration of her emotions, where most of the time she stays pretty upbeat and positive, but she also just is going to avoid that topic of conversation unless you really force it on her, and that sort of thing. But then also, like, as she's trying to solve the mystery, discovering that there's these hidden sides to all of the rest of her family too that she didn't see because she was kind of too in her own thing.
Yep.
And I liked all of that, because we have like the aunt whose emotions control the weather, but it's also kind of like, well, you want the weather to be nice for the town, right? So all smiles, no matter how you actually feel, and that sort of thing, right? But and then uh, we have Mirabelle's two sisters, right? So
The
there's
strength one.
yeah,
Yeah.
Louisa, who's super strong, and that's really great, and she has a great song, which is I think my favorite song, Surface Pressure, where she talks about how, like, yeah, she's so strong, she's so capable, but as a result, people give her all the hard jobs, and not only that, but they often will have her do stuff that doesn't even really need to be done, but they ask her just because she's capable of it. Like, how important was it really to move the church 2 more inches that way, right? Like, how and the running gag of the donkeys is such a highlight of this. Is like, why is she carrying donkeys around? They have their own legs. They can just walk. And so, and so to highlight just this illustration, like one of the lines from her song that really I think drives that is she's talking about how, like, the ship doesn't even swerve when it sees how big the iceberg is because they just trust that I'm going to fix it. They don't even try to move. They just depend on me to move it for them. They're not even being careful. And I worry that one day, if I miss a step or I drop something or I'm distracted, somebody's going to get hurt because they've been depending on me for so long that they don't even take care of themselves anymore.
Yep.
And so, like, my experience watching that song is like, as it starts, it's like, oh man, she's so cool. She's awesome. She's so tough. Oh, well, yeah, I guess that's probably pretty hard. Oh, oh no. Oh no, somebody help her. But then, like, by the same token, Isabel we've been shown her only as the perfect prima donna who's going to get married to the local hottie, only to discover she actually doesn't want to marry this guy. She has only been going along with it because she thinks Abuela wants her to, and there's no questioning Abuela. And so I liked, again, Mirabelle's like astonished reaction of like, what are you talking about? You're going to marry him just you don't want to though? Like that. And so her song of like her gift is at first what we understand her gift to be is growing all sorts of beautiful flowers everywhere. But then we learn she can actually grow any kind of plants. It's just flowers are the only thing anyone ever asks her to grow. And sort of discovering, oh, you know what? I could make something else. I don't have to make flowers just because that's what everybody else wants me to make. What else can I do? And that song I thought was great too, right? And then so just Mirabelle, through her own search, uncovering the hidden sides of all of her family members, and then of course Bruno is another example of this, right? Where you know no one wants to talk about Bruno. We don't talk about Bruno. No. Yes, everyone knows the song at this point, probably. And if you don't, you should. It's like you should listen to it. Like
it's actually a good song.
It's a good song. It's like it does one of the things that I really like musicals to do, which is have different verses sung by different characters, but then at the end to have them all singing their own melodies overlapping and it sounding really cool, like this tapestry of music is great. This movie does that, or that song does that really well, and I love it. So
it's a very good song.
Yeah.
It's one of those ones where you might have heard it and been like, oh, this is silly or whatever, but
well, and in context of the movie too, because like outside of the movie, it's like it's nice to listen to, but the lyrics don't mean anything. Like it's like what are they even talking about?
Right. Like I think one of my friends who heard it outside the context of the movie was like, for a guy they don't talk about, they're certainly talking about him a lot in this song. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, okay, of course, in the song they're talking about it, but they're talking about why they don't.
Well, and I think what's
the song. Talk about them.
Yeah, and what you get from the context in the film, of course, is everybody wants to, though, right? We don't. Right. That doesn't mean they don't want to. And it's, once again, you get the feeling that the we don't talk about Bruno rule is an Abuela rule.
It's Abuela's rule, yep. Abuela says we don't talk about Bruno, but what she means is I'm telling you not to talk about Bruno.
Yeah, and it's the sort of thing where we can imagine that she didn't even ever have to say that, right? She didn't even ever have to tell people not to. All it would take from her, in the way that she's got everybody watching her for approval, is if someone mentions Bruno, she just kind of frowns at them, right? And then they know. Oh, whew, no, okay, never mind, right? Like, and that's all. Like, that's all it would take. And so the context of that song is everybody's actually dying to talk about Bruno because he's a family member who is mysteriously missing for 10 years. And he was interesting and strange. People want to talk about him. So we get lots of stuff there. But like, so this discovery, like, I think those of us who have seen movies before can kind of guess that it's unlikely to actually be the case. But, what Mirabelle is hearing about him is that he's weird and dangerous and maybe kind of scary, right? But then what we learn is that far from being this person who takes glee in foretelling doom of everyone around him, he is actually someone who has hidden himself away, sealing up the cracks in the house unseen and uncredited for 10 years, looking through tiny holes in the wall at his family, and doing that because he thinks that is the way to love them. Is that if he's been taught that his presence is harmful, so the way to protect them from him is to withdraw. but he can't bear to actually leave. That's heartbreaking.
Yes, that part's heartbreaking. Like the whole
Mm-hmm.
point that you hit on with before, which that there's a dark side to every one of their gifts. Like
Mm-hmm.
his dark side is so dark. Like he has to live with the fact that he has these visions. Like he's not
Mm-hmm.
manifesting these things to happen,
Right.
but he has to see all these things, and it's horrifying to him.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And then
and
everybody's ostracizing him because of it, and he removes himself from the situation by living in the damn walls.
mm-hmm.
Like it's very, very heartbreaking. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so, just this discovery that Mirabelle goes on, where she sets out to learn why she doesn't have a gift. What she ends up actually learning is more about all of the rest of her family. And there's some great gags along the way. I absolutely love the seeing the bird and all the stairs. It was like, well, if I'm going to climb all those stairs, at least I'll have company. Oh no, you just flew away immediately. And then the lots of just fun little stuff too of uh, the cousin who can hear really well. So there's the bit where she's found the prophecy and put it together, and then her dad finds her, and it's one of those. It's kind of a nuanced thing where he's supportive and understanding, and he's actually one of the few characters that kind of gets what she's going through because he also doesn't have a gift because he married into the family.
Mhm.
And he's her dad, and so like there's a connection there that is missing a little bit, but at the same time he is just under Abuela's thrall as everybody else, because there's this feeling of like, this seems very important not just to you but to the whole family, and we need to do something about it, but not yet, because the guy's coming to marry Isabella, and Abuela is determined that everything go well. So we'll wait till after. Don't say anything until then, right? And so it's this combination of trying to be supportive, but it's still conditional because of this control that's over everybody, right? But the gag, of course, is we don't say a word to anybody. And then the rack focus shows this cousin who can hear everything in the background, just with the reaction. And then the following bit of the dinner of just this progression of trying to watch her so she doesn't tell anybody, but every time something blocks her view, a new person has learned it, and then it's just all falling apart. The escalation of the gags in that sequence is amazing.
Yes. It's very good.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, so I love this movie. Like I said, I have notes about the ending, but overall, they're nitpicks because I could still, like, my head canon that all of the work was done is not contradicted by anything in the movie. It's just the movie doesn't show it, is all. Right?
right.
But I will, though, maintain that Dos Orguritas is not a bad song, but it's also not the best song, and it's weird that that's the song that they submitted for the best original song.
Yeah, and maybe it's a timing thing, but even if they don't feel like it, it we don't talk about Bruno should have been the song.
Hmm.
It's everything. It encapsulates everything that's good about this movie.
Mm-hmm.
All the characters have a part in it. Like
Yep.
it's not just the people who originally approach her. Like the whole
Mm-hmm.
thing, and it also like talks to their personalities about like
Mm-hmm.
what their relationship was with Bruno.
Mm-hmm.
Like and then to your point at the end, the tapestry that's woven where each individual verse is then it's not the verses are replayed, it's the continuation of the verse
Mm-hmm.
layered on top of each other. Like
Yeah.
and it's a
The
catchy
build.
song. Like, the
The
whole
build is
thing
great.
is
Yeah.
just yeah, it's so good. It's just it feels like such a miss that they didn't put that in here.
Mm-hmm.
As but anyway,
Uh,
the only thing I would add is that the you've covered in depth the part that what I was worried was going to be the note that kind of held me back from this movie.
Hmm?
It actually deconstructed, which my concern was always going to be this whole idea that you have to have a gift and like there's one thing you're good at,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't just get to you choose and work at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was always rooting for her to be like the one who doesn't actually have a gift, but she like picks something and like works hard for it and she gets it.
Mm-hmm.
But while that wasn't the case in what happened, it it definitely made that less of an issue for me by
Right.
the fact that there's like the dark side to it, that there's
Mm-hmm.
it, it there was just a lot more depth to what was happening as opposed to
Yeah. I agree, and I like that aspect of it, and I'm glad you brought that up because it does kind of ultimately try to make the point that gifts or not, you shouldn't try to define a person by the one thing that they're good at.
right.
That's not healthy for you or for them to think of it that way. And it's not healthy to end up having your whole life, completely devoted to just the one thing and not have any other interests or never taking a break or never doing anything different to change things up, being totally single minded on one particular interpretation of what you've been told you're good at, right? And in some respects, it feels a little bit in that way like a response to The Incredibles, which I'm not knocking The Incredibles. I think it's a great movie, but I think that there are ways you can interpret some of that stuff that the movie doesn't contradict that aren't as great. Because there's a way to read The Incredibles, which is kind of to say, no, some people really are just better than others and shouldn't have to pretend they're not. Right? And it's one thing to say, like, the whole bit in The Incredibles is like, well, everyone's special dash is like, well, it's another way of saying no one is. It's like, no, that's an oversimplification. People are special in different ways at different things. So, just because one person is special at running really fast and other people are special in different ways. It's not a competition in that sense. And so it's a potentially harmful framing to talk about it that way.
Right. Because if you haven't found something that you're like ridiculously good at, like
Yeah.
are you flawed? No. Maybe just I mean, and so the idea that you can not only is if you did have that, there would be a backside to it, but
Mm-hmm.
you need to just work to continue to work to find it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it did better than I was worried that it was going to do
Mm-hmm.
on the on that front. And so
Yeah.
it surprised me in that because when it first laid out this premise, I was like, I don't know that I want that's what I want kids learning, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah. Well, yeah. This idea that everybody's got this special power, and that's the thing that's interesting about them. Only
right.
that,
And
and nothing.
that's what people should rely on them for, right?
Yes. And so, like that. I agree. I really liked the handling of that because it introduces the natural curiosity that we all have because that's the thing that is special about the story is that this place where this family has all these strange magical gifts, right? That's the interesting thing about it to begin with, right? But what we learn is that there is more to each of these people than what that magical gift is, and the fact that you have a magical gift does not it's not the end all be all of who you are as a person or whether you are interesting or worth knowing, right? Like, and I liked all of that too. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. I
All
also
right.
really liked that they made Louisa actually like big and buff and not just having her look like a skinny little girl who is nonetheless inexplicably strong. I liked her
Right.
looking big like that. I thought that was great.
Yes. So
One last little bit of
go
trivia
ahead.
is that Mirabelle is played by Stephanie Beatriz, I think is the pronunciation of her name, who I previously knew primarily as Rosa from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is kind of crazy just in the sense that Rosa is an extremely different character than Mirabelle is. And so for that to be the role that I primarily associated with her with before, and then learning that Mirabelle was played by her was kind of blew my mind a little bit. So, in any case. So, anything else to say about Encanto?
Nope.
All right. Well, then I think we will stop our update there. We still have three more movies that we can potentially, or a few more movies that we could potentially both discuss in our next update. But we're also going to continue to see more of the nominated films. So our next update will be when we can. And in the meantime, watch good movies, everyone.
Good movies.